Hello, everybody. It's time to put down your cell phones, smartphones, tablets, and start paying attention to the front. I don't know if you've seen these things that's sitting on your chairs. It says that you can pay money to get them on a DVD and so on. I just want to mention that this year, all the session presentations are available online, free afterwards. It's got a little small printed in the middle here, easy to miss. Streaming of sessions will be available for free on the Esri website for 1 year. All right, let's get started. We're going to talk about elevation, high things, bringing your data to life in the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. My name is Bjorn Svensson. I'm the lead product engineer for JavaScript API. And with me today is...
Hi, I'm Russ Roberts. There we go. I'm Russ Roberts. I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS Online team, mainly focused on the 3D products that we're pushing out on a regular basis. So yeah, we're just going to talk about how you can create elevation layers and then bring them into some applications using the JavaScript API. So what are we actually going to be using during this session? I'm going to be showing you ArcGIS Pro 1.4.1, but you can use 1.3 if you wanted to, or 1.4 as well. I'm going to be generating a tile package that we're going to be uploading to ArcGIS Online and using my organizational account, and then I'll be creating a hosted elevation layer, and then Bjorn's going to be taking that hosted elevation layer and bringing it into a sample application using the JavaScript API. So what are elevation layers? They help by creating a 3D visualization and adding relief to your scenes. They're a static layer. You can create them from LiDAR data, DSMs, DEMs, contour sources. In this case, I'm going to be publishing these from the tile package generated from Pro. But there's other ways that you can generate elevation layers for your portal or for your ArcGIS server, depending on your setup. So I'm going to kind of go over those different workflows too. Some things that you want to think about when you're creating cached layers, like an elevation layer for use in the scene viewer or in a 3D application with the JavaScript API. You want to think about the resolution that you're using, like the 256 by 256, the first bullet up there. Those are the two resolutions that you'll want to have. You also want to have your tiling scheme set to the power of 2. So like the example that's there, I'll have one scale level at 1 to 128,000, and then the next one to 1 to 64,000. So if you do not follow the power of 2, it won't be able to load correctly into your 3D application. And just a special note too, when you're using cached layers, like elevation layers, tile layers, or scene layers, you want to make sure that you're using all the same coordinate systems because these are light applications and they cannot reproject it on the fly. So you want to make sure that you're using everything with the same, like either WGS84 coordinate system or your own projected coordinate system. So I just have these are some helpful things you should think about when you're about to create these elevation layers, either in ArcGIS Online or in your portal and server. You want to think about that spatial reference that you're going to be using because, like I said before, you won't be able to reproject it. So if you're using scene layers in a local projected coordinate system, then you want to have your elevation layer in that exact same coordinate system. So we can't mix match those. What tiling scheme are we going to be using? So we provide you with the elevation tiling scheme that ArcGIS Online uses. So you can use that out of the box, or you're going to have to create your own. And then you'll have to use the generate tiling scheme tool to generate that tiling scheme beforehand before you start actually generating your elevation layer. So you need to think about this. That might be an extra step that you might have to do. And also, where are you publishing this content? Is it going to go to ArcGIS Online? So in that case, you'll just be uploading a tile package that contains your lurk tiles, which are essentially what makes up the elevation layer. In Portal for ArcGIS, you can actually add that elevation layer directly into your scene that you're authoring within ArcGIS Pro and do a one-click publish to your portal, and that'll generate your web scene and also start generating your elevation layer, and depending on the projection, it'll auto-create the best tiling scheme to suit your needs. And then if you're using ArcGIS Server, you can actually publish these elevation layers through ArcMap. So if you have ArcMap and you have an image service extension, you can create these tiled image layers and publish it directly to your server. And then, depending on those different scenarios, you'll have to think about the tools you'll need. So you'll either need to use the generate tile cache tool, or manage tile cache and export tile cache. So I'm going to show you how to actually create an elevation layer that you're going to be using in ArcGIS Online. So I'm going to jump over to my demo and quickly show you how to do this. So here I have an exaggerated data set to kind of help show the example. This is Mount St. Helens before the eruption in 1980. So you can see I did a little raster calc on it to extrude it up to make it easier to see on the screen. And I'm going to create an elevation layer out of this that Bjorn's going to use. So I just go into the analysis tools, and the first thing I'm going to use is the manage tile cache tool. And here I just need to set where I want to output the cache that I'm going to be generating. Oops. Let's see. There we go. Give it a name. And I'm just going to pick my data source. And you can see the input tiling scheme. Here's where you would point to either the custom tiling scheme that you generate with the tool generate tile cache, or I can use a tile scheme, or I can use the actual Esri provided ArcGIS Online elevation tiling scheme. So if you're running this tool and you select ArcGIS Online tiling scheme or ArcGIS Online scheme, those first two, what that'll end up doing is not the output won't be able to be used to generate a elevation layer. You need to make sure that you choose the elevation tiling scheme. And here it'll go through and, depending on your cache, pre-select some levels. So you can go ahead and select the level of detail that you'll want within your scene. I'm just going to uncheck a couple just for this to have the tools actually run through for the time that we have in this presentation. And then I'm just going to hit run. And this will start generating that cache. And so while this is generating, oh, sweet, it's really quick this time. So now that I actually have that cache, I have it present right here, I need to use one more tool, and that's export tile cache. So I'm going to go to the cache that I just generated, set the output location. Oops. Give it a name. And this is the next important thing. Where it says export cache as, make sure you select tile package. And so that's what we're going to be uploading to ArcGIS Online. So then I'll just hit run, and then this will start building that tiled package. And while this is happening, I just want to point to a couple of key sites. One, we just released the documentation on actually how our elevation layers are designed and spec'd. So if you go to the developer site, you can read all about the structure of elevation layers and lurk tiles. And then also, this entire demo that I'm kind of showing you right now, it's available on a blog and kind of running through the steps for being able to create this in ArcGIS Online. So if you want to do this with the same demo data set, It's available, all hosted in ArcGIS Online for you to download and use in your own pro project, so you can use it and follow along. So my export has completed. And so underneath my organization, I can just go through Add Item from my computer, and I'm just going to choose that export that just ran. And what this will do, this will just like a normal tiled package that you would use for a hosted tiled layer. This is doing the exact same thing, except for it's creating a hosted elevation layer. And this will start the publishing process. So this is going to be publishing. It'll take, for the minimal levels, this shouldn't take too long, but I already have one already created. So it's going to go back to my content. And I'm just going to add a sample elevation already added in. And so just like what we saw in Pro, let's see if I can give it. We now have that very extreme extruded Mount St. Helens before the eruption. And I can actually, in the scene viewer itself, toggle between the two. So we can see what it was like beforehand. Whoops. And enable it back on so we can actually see what it looked like before and after. So now that we've seen the publishing process and how this was actually kind of built in just a few clicks and just upload it to online to create that hosted layer that then we can share through a template web app builder or to the API, I'm actually going to hand this over to Bjorn, and he's going to show you how to leverage these elevation layers along with the world elevation that Esri provided and this custom one that I just built.
Thank you, Russ. Russ showed you how to use this in Pro and in Scene Viewer. The Scene Viewer is built on top of the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, and the API are used both in the Scene Viewer but also in the 3D web app builder and the 3D configurable apps that we have. So any of these apps is something you could use with this sort of data. Now, if you actually want to write the code or extend any of these, then going back to the API and understanding how that works is important. One of the key things and the new type with 3D is the elevation layer. For the last few years, or for a long time, Esri has been promoting base maps and operational layers. Elevation layer is neither, so it complicates the story a little bit. Usually we have a base map and we have operational layers. The elevation layer itself, it just sort of impacts the rest of the scene. It shows the elevation for it. And what I'm looking at here is the API reference and a very basic sample where you can specify the elevation layer you want to use, and you point it to the service you want to have. So if you have a nice coworker that creates a very nice sample data set for Mount Helen, then you can use that in your application. And when you want to specify the elevation layers, that goes into what we call the map's ground. And if you remember in the scene viewer, it actually showed us ground in the legend. By default, Esri provides a world elevation service. And to do that, all you have to specify is the ground equal world elevation service. If you want to use either your own world elevation service, you can specify that. Or if you want to combine our world elevation with yours. So in more common cases, you probably have very detailed data for your area of interest, and for the rest of the world, you're okay with just having the service from Esri. And there's a few different ways you can do it. In this case here, we're basically showing that I'm adding world elevation and custom elevation together at the same time. In the API reference, or in the documentation, we also have a lot of samples. And I took one of our existing samples, and I changed it so that I pointed the elevation here to use the same elevation layer that Russ created yesterday. Now, you can see here that I've added the elevation. I can move around, and you can see the top of it. Now, the map I'm using here is actually the shaded relief map. And you can sort of see where the borderline goes. Because remember, we got the new world elevation, the custom elevation. We didn't actually get the imagery or the data from before. And you can see this even easier if we change the base map that's being used. Satellite. So you'll notice it looks darker on top. So the key thing here is that if you have scenarios like this when you're having the terrain has changed a lot, you probably also want to have a matching data that matches up with that. Here it doesn't look too bad, but if you get it into the right angle, and here you don't really see the elevation change, right? So one thing to keep in mind. So what we're talking about here is all about elevation, not about the actual data that you want to display on top of it. So in the resource center, we have a number of samples, and you can filter the samples by just searching for elevation. And the first day 3D map with elevation service was the first sample that I showed you. I just had changed the service and changed the camera to zoom into the right area. We have another sample that's called query elevation. So elevation is not just for visual things. Elevation also has the actual data of the elevation. That doesn't sound right. Elevation layer also actual elevation data. So if we look at this as an application, this is not St. Helena, it's a different case. Here it's a landslide that occurred and moved the land a little bit. So, oops. You can sort of see the before and after. And if you look in this area here, you see that the landslide, the land slid. That's a landslide definition, right? And we can measure these by clicking on the map here. And I'm asking both the world elevation and also my custom elevation, what's the elevation, and I do some advanced math, and I get the difference. And I can see in that exact point, we've lost 63 meters. And if you go higher up on the edge, it's a little less. And if you get down here, you get higher. So this is using an elevation layer and querying the elevation for that data. So in the API reference, we have a number of things, both as samples and API reference. And we have the world tile layer documentation. And I think those are all good resources for getting started or getting into more details. I also want to recommend the blog article that Russ wrote. You want to show that back up and the URL? Take a picture, memorize it, or look at the free videos afterwards. And did you have one more slide that says something fancy like questions?
All right. There we go. So yeah, that's pretty much it for our session. Don't have a slide for questions, but this is the closing slide. So please feel free to shoot us some questions on any of the workflows.
Go ahead. Questions up, hands up. All right.
Are you able to query the elevation layer if you wanted to get back the actual elevation value?
So the question is, can you query the elevation layer to get back the elevation for a specific lat long? Yes. Can do lines, right? The question is, can you query for an area and get back all the elevation points? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't.
You can query for a line. I can't remember if you do area. So we have another sample that basically does routing and it calculates the elevation profile based on that. I'm not sure about the actual, if it's an area, but you can probably quickly look at the doc while I'll meander to the next question. Oh, you should use the other search, but that's all right. While Russ looks up the cheat sheet, any other questions? One in the back. You're going to have to be loud. Sorry, I'm not hearing anything. Compressions. That's your question. Do we still need to use?
Yes. It's all based off of the lurk.
Lurk. Oh, okay.
Yeah, the lurk tiling. That's the output format. So if you're generating your own custom tiling scheme, that's a very important part in that process, that you set the output for within your tiling scheme file that you're going to generate in that tool. It's going to be the lurk format and not like PNG or anything like that, or JPEG. You want to use the lurk format, and then you'll use that in that manage tile cache tool to generate that cache with that tiling scheme using the lurk format.
Cool. Good question.
Sorry, could you say that? I don't want to walk past those things because I'll set off a really loud sound. Sorry, well, I'm just going to...
All right.
So the question was asking that elevation tiling scheme that I used in Pro, the ArcGIS Online, Esri, ArcGIS Online elevation tiling scheme. That one, yes, that one already has the lurk tiling format included into it, so you don't have to do any special checkboxes or formatting to get a proper cache outputted from that tool to be used for an elevation layer. So yeah, you just choose the elevation option, and then that'll follow the same ArcGIS Line Web Mercator tiling scheme, but the tile format will actually, the tile format will actually come out as being lurk. And then because you're using the elevation, the ArcGIS Online elevation tiling scheme, you can use that in global or local scenes as well. So in the cases that you saw us use here today, they were all in global. But because I use the ArcGIS Online elevation tiling scheme, which is Web Mercator, it can also be used in a local scene where you could clip the extent down to just like Mount St. Helens if you wanted to. Cool. Yeah.
Now it's green. The question was, how does the elevation impact the routing service? And I think you're asking about, do we make cars drive slower uphill? Or, yeah, the elevation is not used for the routing. And this sample here was just using the route, and then based on that line, we're getting the elevation and figuring out how much the total descent and ascent. I'm not sure if the routing services for itself, if you're using the walking routes, takes that into account. If you have any more questions about the ArcGIS API for JavaScript and using elevation under web development, we'll be right over there for the rest of the day and tomorrow. Yeah. And the next people are going to come in here, but if you have any quick questions, you can try and talk to us while we tear things down or walk over there. Thank you, guys.